for the yesterday's class, that is 23rd March. So yesterday we talked about the two theories proposed by Maslow and Herzberg. Though both the theories have their strengths, but they also have their limitations. For Maslow, we said that it has got a lot of intuitive appeal, but he could not provide any empirical support for his theory. We all human beings are different, and that is why expecting that one theory will apply to everyone in the same way would not be a right kind of proposition. So limitations therefore crept in due to this too simplistic notion. Now, unlike Maslow, who visualized needs arranged on a single continuum, Herzberg pointed out that it is not a single continuum, rather it is two separate continuums. That is why Herzberg's theory makes more sense. But again, Herzberg's theory also has certain limitations. Herzberg conducted a formal research on a group of respondents who were primarily middle-level managers. When they were interviewed, they were asked two simple questions. Think of your job situation when you felt extremely bad, and think of a job situation when you felt extremely good and happy. Obviously, yes. So the point here is the developed context in which the theory was developed and whether all its assumptions would prove valid and relevant in all other contexts like developing countries context or underdeveloped countries. So there are many of the external factors which Herzberg is saying only contributes to reduce dissatisfaction, actually maybe the motivators for others. Now, we discussed a theory called attribution theory, which states that we often blame others for what we could not achieve, and we take credit for all the good things that happen to us in process theories, where the focus is on how people get motivated. Now, we understood that motivation is a phenomenon like the faces of a two coin, the external part and the internal part. And it is also the very theme of this entire course, a hard part and soft part. Now, Sir told us that soft is actually hard. The determination, the dedication, and the desire to excel. All these are soft dimensions, but they bring hard results, and so is the approach of motivation. Earlier, we discussed the examples of motivation in the context of a mother and army, but it is not limited to these two only. Even in a corporate organization, this can happen, and it was demonstrated by the employees of Taj Hotel, one of the premium hotels of Taj Group. So there were around 450 guests staying in the hotel, and there were employees, including the general manager, who lost his wife and his two kids. In all, 11 employees lost their lives during that siege of the hotel by terrorists. But people were amazed that not even a single employee ran away from the situation. They made a valiant effort to save the guests, and in the process, many of them lost their lives. Now, a lot of Harvard researchers are working on this to understand how this has happened in such an organization. They're trying to dig out as to what was there in their HR policies. Although there was nothing mentioned in the manual on how employees would behave if such a situation arises, but everybody rose to the occasion. So this is the highest level of motivation, and it could occur even in a business organization. So this was it that we discussed yesterday. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. So, good morning, respected teachers and my dear friends. So, talking about the recap of previous class, discussion was started with the limitations of Maslow's theory and Herzberg's theory. Maslow's theory provided an intuitive appeal, but then we know that humans are of varied nature, and expecting that one theory will suit everyone will not be rational. And also, it is based on single continuum. Talking about Herzberg's theory, it is an outcome of research which was conducted in an American company with respondents who were basically accountants and engineers. Here, two simple questions were asked about thinking of a job situation when it was extremely bad and extremely happy. Responses were based on two factors. When they felt bad, the factors were related to external context, while when they were happy, it was because of them. Uh, like it happens in attribution theory. Herzberg's theory was based on American context, but if we talk about other countries, factors are different. Like in India, salary determines the status of individual, unlike America, because of social security schemes. And many of the factors which are reducing dissatisfaction for one can actually be motivators for others. So both social context and methodology adopted to conduct the research have their limitations. Now, talking about another theory, which is theory X and theory Y. Theory X and theory Y by McGregor depends upon assumptions that you create about people when you motivate them, and it refers to two styles of management, authoritarian and participative. To understand this theory, an example on classic app was discussed. During this task, our respected teacher has some assumptions about students like they are bright students with high grasping power and can perform a better job. But can we say that this case is same with other teachers too? No, because many of them believe that students have to be pushed to study. Given a choice, they will not perform. Every manager has some assumptions about other people, which are classified into two categories, i.e., that is, theory X and theory Y. In theory X, manager assumes that people are naturally unmotivated, dislike doing work, and avoid responsibilities. They have to be controlled and forced to perform a work. In this, people are motivated with a carrot and stick approach. It can be done through rewards of good performance and punishment otherwise. In theory Y, managers assume that employees have an intrinsic desire to work. They are internally motivated, enjoy their job, and work to better themselves without a direct reward in return. Here, the job of the manager is just to facilitate this process of movement. So the approach that we take, we have will have a significant impact on our ability to motivate our team members. So it's important to understand how our perceptions of what motivates them can shape our management style. Now coming to fourth theory, which is needs theory, David McClellan has proposed three needs theory which motivates people to work. He identified three motivators that he believed we all have: need for achievement, need for power, and need for affiliation. First one is need for achievement. Under this category, people have a strong desire to set and accomplish challenging goals with some calculated risk. They also like to receive feedbacks on their achievements. Second, need for power. It is a need to control and influence others. In this, people enjoy having competitions and winning them. They try to influence others' decisions according to their own desire. Third one is affiliation needs. It is the desire to have friendly and close interpersonal relationships. In this, people favors collaboration instead of competition. McClellan traveled many countries, including India, to study how is it so that some societies are more entrepreneurial than others. He found societies having these three needs. Among these three, entrepreneurial societies are those where need for achievement is very high and people have a strong desire to succeed. Then we also talked about motivation. Other than example of mother and soldier, it can also be found in business organizations. One of the example is of Taj Hotel when it was under attack. There were 450 guests and many employees in it. None of the employees ran away from the situation, but they faced it, and 11 of them lost their lives while saving guests. Now, many researches are going on. What are the unique HR policies of HR policies of Tata Group which motivated employees to this extent? It is now a business case study. Thank you. This was all about the previous class.
Thank you, Hamad and Zaid.
Thank you, sir.
You have done a good job, both of you. And maybe content wise, Hamad covered the McClelland's need for achievement theory also, which was not covered by Zaid. In terms of presentation style, I think Zaid, you have to focus more on your body language, especially eye contact part. The way you speak, it appears as if you are looking in a vacuum, not maintaining direct eye contact with the audience.
Okay,
So that will add to your performance. And Zaid, Hamad, overall your body language was good,
Thank you,
but
sir.
still I feel you need to bring more variety in your delivery.
Okay,
That
sir.
will make your presentation more natural.
Okay, sir.
Presently, it appears you are following the same uniform style all through. So at
Okay,
times
sir.
it might get a bit monotonous. So
Yes, sir.
bring some more variety, and that will bring more natural flow in your delivery.
Okay, sir.
But overall, content-wise, both of you were rich, and you covered the entire content, except for that one omission that Zaid did about the.
so I actually spoke that David McClelland's theory, the three need theory.
So maybe I missed that. Okay, so now we will initiate a discussion on the fifth unit today, and which is on controlling. And in order to initiate the discussion, I would like to ask you a few questions. One is there are two words, control and controls. What is the difference and the relationship between these two terms, control and controls? What is your layman's understanding of these two terms?
So controlled and controls, right?
No, control and
And
controls.
So control is applicable on first person and controls applicable on second and third person, maybe.
Mm.
The control is in English term, while controls is in Sanskrit term.
Pardon, Fatma. Say it again.
In that sense, sir, control is an English word that control, but controls is used in experimental form. Like you have some assumptions, then you have controls for that. So in that sense,
So is that not an English
that's how
word?
I.
Hmm?
And yes, that is, but that is mostly used in scientific. Like, you are assuming something, then you are assuming controls of that experiment. More in scientific context that is used, and
Is
control is
controls.
simply to control something.
So control is basically oriented on the past and controls is for future oriented.
Controls are future oriented.
So
So control
control
is
is
to
to control someone, and controls are with what we control.
the control is to have some limitations and limits on someone or
Your
someone's
voice
action.
is very feeble, Sanathan. So please speak a bit loud.
Sir, control is to set some regulations or limits to someone's actions, and controls is maybe the checks and balances we have in a particular system.
Okay. Actually, in very simple terms, controls are the measures through which control is exercised. So, for example, suppose your parents, they want to control your behavior. So they may set certain limits. Like for example, one of the control measure could be that they may say, come back to home by 10 in the night. You are not allowed to stay out after that. Or it could be even more strict for girls, for example. So there could be other controls also. For example, what time you will get up or what time you will have your dinner and all that. You can have all kind of controls. So my question is, if you have more controls, does it lead to better control?
So not always. So it might get overwhelming sometimes. Like if we have
It
a
might
lot
get.
of overwhelming sometimes. Like for example, if there are a lot of like controls are sort of restrictions sometimes. So, like I'm not obviously controls are good in certain way, but if there are too much of them, it might affect or it might get messed up.
And this is the paradox of controlling actually. The more you try to control, the more it gets out of control. So there is a principle which we call ABC, always better control. To control what brings best results. And if we try to control the trivia, like for example, maybe we watch the employees or our own kids movement by keeping a stopwatch, तुमने इतने वक्त ये किया, तुमने इतने वक्त ये किया, and all that. Actually, one thing which you need to appreciate, controlling is a sounds like a negative term. In some ways, it may sound actually an obnoxious term. If you say to somebody, I'm controlling you, will he feel good about it?
No, sir,
No,
for
sir.
sure.
So
It's
this is
like
something which you need to appreciate. That controlling is not a very pleasurable activity. In fact, if I had the choice, I would rather than using the term control, I would have used word monitoring. We want to just monitor the progress or performance as far as, I mean, the whatever standards of performance we have set for ourselves. But traditionally, we have been using controls, controlling as one of the function of management. But you need to appreciate that this is not a very desirable term. And this point also we need to keep in mind that more controls does not necessarily result in better control. In fact, if we start controlling too much, the things may actually be out of control. Isn't it? Somebody in the context of relationships gave me a very beautiful example. A mother actually gave me that example, and when I asked her, how did you ensure such a grooming for your kids? She shared with me an analogy, and she said, parenting is like holding sand in your hand. So if you hold too tightly, the sand slips out of your hand. But if you keep your hands open and then you keep that sand on your hand, you can control, or you can have far more amount of sand in your hand than if you try to have a grip and try to control it. It slips out. Isn't it? So this is to me, a very pertinent analogy to understand all control situations. So one lesson which we need to learn is don't control everything. Control what brings best results. I give you an example. There is a principle called 80-20 principle. In all organizations, this applies. 20% of the efforts bring 80% of the results. For example, I recall during my MBA days, I was doing my summer training in a company called Tomco. It was called Tata Oil Mills Limited. It was a Tata Group company. And they had a soap. It was into soap making. And later on, it was bought over by Hindustan Levers. So they had a soap called OK. It was their version of Lifebuoy soap, which we all must have heard of. And OK was contributing to almost 60% of the sales coming out of the toilet soap category. And naturally, this was a star product for them, and they were focusing on its sale, monitoring it very closely. Likewise, for the competitor, Hindustan Levers at that point of time, and even now, Hindustan Lever, one of its product, that is Lifebuoy, continues to be a star product. And naturally, they have to focus. They may have 10 other toilet soaps in the category, but Lifebuoy is the lifeblood of the organization. So naturally, they have to keep a strong tap on how this is progressing in the market. So my point is, again, I repeat that point, ABC, always better control. Don't control the trivia. Control what really matters or brings results. So for example, in case of students, it could be learning that they have from the class. Not just, monitoring their attendance, physical presence in the class. Yes, and that is why some of the teachers are not very particular about attending. They said if students feel like attending my class, they'll come. If they will feel that they are gaining something, they'll come. But some teachers you may find are very particular about it. So the point is that you have to focus on this ABC. What is those 20% of the things which bring maximum results, isn't it? Then one more thing we need to appreciate in the context of controlling as an activity, that controls are neither objective nor neutral, especially in the human situation. Let me give you an example. How controlling is different in physical kind of world vis-a-vis human kind of world, where people are being controlled. I have experienced this in one of my classes in the student days. We had a teacher who was an English teacher, and he used to teach us English. And one day it so happened that when we were attending the class, what we noted was that the teacher all of a sudden shifted gears, and he was at his poetic best. And choicest of the words were, oozing out of his mouth. And which is one of the best poetic expositions I have ever heard. And we were a bit surprised what has happened. Actually, what has happened was that later on we came to know of it that silently the vice chancellor came in the lecture theatre from the back side and sat on one of the back benches. So nobody, he didn't disturb the class. But naturally, vice chancellor, the teacher who was engaging the class, he saw him coming in, and because of that, the it impacted the teacher's performance and it impacted favorably. My elder brother, who was also a student at that point of time, he shared with me a different experience. And he said that we were having a class of political science, and there was a teacher who was primarily a very good teacher. And at that point, the then vice chancellor had this habit that he would, you know, get into classes just to have a feel as to how teachers are teaching. So he entered into this person's class also and sat in the class. And somehow this created so much of nervousness in this particular teacher that my elder brother says that all of a sudden we just couldn't understand what has happened. And then because we had good rapport with him and he was a good teacher, we stopped him in between and we asked him a few questions कि sir please इसको फिर से बता दीजिए ये हम नहीं समझ पाए and all that. And with lot of efforts he came to his natural style of teaching. And in fact, later on, my elder brother says that he thanked us that it was good that you stopped me. I was not in my usual self, but since you people started asking questions, and I was so he profusely thanked the students for this act of theirs. Now I have described you two situations. The situation is the same, but the responses of the two teachers is very different. In one case, it affects the performance favorably, and in another case, it affects adversely. So, this is what I was saying that controlling a human phenomena is very different than controlling a physical phenomena. For example, if you have a body, you take a ball, let us say, to the top floor of a building and you drop it from there and you measure the rate of its fall. Your act of measuring that fall will not impact the body in any way or its rate of fall. It will continue to fall at the same time. But what I am pointing out is that this will not happen in case of the human beings. Each human being may respond to a control situation differently. And that is why I made that observation that controls are neither objective nor neutral. They affect the person who is being controlled. And you all must have experienced it in your own family's context. How people respond to this act of controlling differently. Some children they take it there in their stride, some rebel, some become too submissive. So this is another thing which we have to keep in mind when we are performing this act of control. Then there is a third challenge of control. How do you, for example, again, let me start with the example and an example which you can appreciate. Suppose you want to judge a teacher's performance. How should you judge? What could be the measures?
So the teaching methods that they're using.
Okay.
सर एग्जाम में कितने बच्चे चीटिंग करते हैं?
Uh, I couldn't get. Please say it again.
How many children are actually doing the exam paper on their own?
Yes, you are very right. Actually, this is one of the method, especially at the school and college level. Pass percentage of the students, isn't it? So generally at the university level, how what happens is, let me share with you the criteria which has evolved, and it is called KPI, performance indicators, annual performance indicators. And generally what is used, the measure which is used to assess a teacher's performance is his publication record, H index. And citations are assessed. If teacher has published something, how many times it has been cited by others. And based on that, the teacher's performance is assessed. So generally when we have interviews conducted for promotions, generally the questions would revolve around this. In fact, you will get an entry based on your publication record. That becomes the first cut. But do you think that is a comprehensive measure of a teacher's performance?
No, sir.
A teacher is primarily hired to teach. Yes, research is an important component of a teacher's job, but it is not the entire component. But why do we resort to such measures? Actually, what happens is we measure what is easy to measure. And qualitative in nature, they get ignored in the process. For example, to me, what matters most in a teacher's performance is how he is able to excite the students intellectually. What kind of excitement, stimulation he is able to provide to the students. What kind of connect he is able to establish with his students. These are the two broad measures of a teacher's performance. To me, they are the most important measures. His connect with the students, because we are in a relationship situation. The student teachers taught relationship situation. What is the quality of that relation? For example, this may also mean whether a teacher gives some time to the students outside the class. If they come for some queries, if they want some help, is the teacher able to provide that? And once he is in the class, what kind of intellectual element he provides to the students? Does he create a love for learning in them? But do you think these measures are easy to measure? Can we really assess how good a teacher is on these two accounts?
No, sir.
So what happens then? We end up measuring what is easy to measure. A publication record is a objective thing to measure. भाई 5 पब्लिश किए हैं, 6 पब्लिश किए हैं, किस लेवल के पब्लिकेशंस हैं, ए कैटेगरी के जर्नल्स में हैं या बी कैटेगरी के जर्नल्स. You have easy way to measure the performance of that. So we generally end up measuring what is easy to measure and not that really matters to measure. And that creates another distortion in our control process. What is then the way out? Can we solve this riddle in any way? So, three challenges I've shared. More controls do not necessarily result in better control. Second, controlling a human situation is very challenging because the very act of controlling impacts the action. It could impact favorably, it could impact adversely. And third, there is a temptation to measure what is easy to measure and not really focus on what should matter. Especially in the process, all qualitative dimensions of the performance they get ignored. क्योंकि ये बड़ा सब्जेक्टिव चीज हो जाती है ना कि आप इस पे असेसमेंट करने लगे कि भाई कौन सा टीचर जो है वो सबसे ज्यादा अप्रोचेबल है क्लास के बाहर फॉर एग्जाम्पल. Now this is a very subjective matter. लेकिन हम ये भी जानते हैं कि जब एल्यूमनाई मीट्स होती हैं तो वो स्टूडेंट्स फॉर्मर स्टूडेंट्स उन्हीं टीचर्स के पास जाते हैं, करीब अपने आप को महसूस करते हैं जिन्होंने उनकी स्टूडेंट लाइफ में उनसे एक पर्सनल कनेक्ट पैदा किया. So this is one of the challenging aspect of control. So I would like you to reflect on these three challenges whenever you are in a position to design a control system for a activity. How can you address these challenges? Now, one next point which I want to discuss in the context of controlling is that there is always a relation of controlling with planning. And how the two are linked? Can we have some observations on this? How planning and controlling are linked?
So in planning, standards are set, and after actual performance, we compare these standards and the actual performance, the variances, and thus we can control.
Exactly. Very true. So the standards of performance are assessed at the or are specified at the planning stage. So, like for example, if the chairman is concerned about the teacher's performance or how the semester is moving, for example, he must have, at some stage done some kind of homework with the controller's office, and based on that, must have specified the length of the semester, for example, how long the semester would run. Especially, this has to be reviewed in the context of the delays which have occurred because of COVID related admission problems, isn't it? So, we got our batch very late. So, suppose let us say, first week of April is decided as the date for last working day for the semester. So naturally, how the chairman would monitor the performance. So informally, he keeps asking us, कि भाई आपका कितना course cover हो गया, and he would keep a tab on whether we are moving in the right direction. isn't it? So what happens is that at the planning stage, we decide the standards of performance. कि देखिए आपको 40 से 45 आवर्स या फिर 45 से 50 आवर्स का एक एंगेजमेंट इस सेशन में करना है स्टूडेंट्स के साथ. And if you have 5 units to cover, you can, let us say, apportion 10 hours each to each of the unit. And accordingly, you can decide the number of classes you are going to have. So we, very rightly, it was pointed out that we set standards of performance, then we measure the performance, and then we see if there is a variation. Suppose the chairman finds in one of the course the progress is slow, while others are in the fifth unit or in the last part of the fourth unit. In this particular course, we have been able to cover only 3 units. So what are the then possible courses of action? So there could be a positive deviation, there could be a negative deviation, or the performance which could match the standards, isn't it? These are the three possibilities. So setting standards of performance, what is the control process? We set standards of performance. Second, we measure the performance. And then we get the results, which could again take three forms. That there could be positive deviation. जैसे पॉजिटिव डिविएशन ये हो सकता है कि आपने ये एक्सपेक्ट किया कि द सेमेस्टर वुड रन टिल लेट अस से 7th of April, और आपको पता चला कि जो 6 कोर्सेज चल रहे थे उसमें से 4 जो थे वो मार्च में ही खत्म हो गए. तो इसका मतलब ये इम्प्लीकेशन है कि कहीं ये पॉजिटिव डिविएशन होगा. तो इस पे हमें खुश होना चाहिए या इस पे भी कुछ करेक्टिव एक्शन की जरूरत हो सकती है.
सर हो सकती है बिकॉज देयर इज अ पॉसिबिलिटी कि वो कोर्स बस खत्म हो गया हो और समझ में ना आया हो. पॉसिबिलिटी.
हमारे एक टीचर कहते थे कि टंटा कटा, तो मतलब खत्म हो गया, अब जैसे भी हुआ हो गया. तो मे बी द क्वालिटी ऑफ लर्निंग वाज कॉम्प्रोमाइज्ड or the standards were set too low. You have to revisit this issue also. So the point is, again, I have already shared with you the challenge. When we set standards of performance, we should measure what really matters to measure. We should not try to measure everything, because trying to measure everything will actually not be a good thing in the final analysis, because it would distort the effort. It would create some kind of problem. The second thing is, yes, measure what is not also easy to measure, but also evolve methods through which you can measure what is difficult to measure, especially the qualitative measures of performance. For example, the quality of interaction. And it is not that it is difficult, it is possible. And in fact, some of the good institutions, they do it. And I was told by one of my professor of English literature, he did double PhD, one from AMU, and then he went to Leicester University in UK, and he got his second PhD from there. And he was telling me that one day I was received with open arms by my supervisor, and he thanked me profusely. And I said, "What has happened?" He said, "You were given a sheet to assess my performance. So students' feedback is an important part of their system. So he said, yes, yes, I received it. And he said, and he told me that this feedback for pharma was so comprehensive that, I mean, almost all dimensions of interactions were covered. For example, there were questions related to how much time in a week your supervisor is able to allot to you for your research work. Then, when you present your case or when you share the progress of your research, how is his demeanor? For example, is he really interested, or is he frowning, or is he, yawning? And I mean, there were all kind of subjective factors being assessed, on a continuum. And based on that, and he actually was very impressed with the supervisor, and he gave a very good rating on that. All the dimensions that he has created this excitement in me, and intellectual excitement, especially of how to assess a literary work and all that. So he gave very good rating, and as a good result of that good rating, that fellow got additional raise in his compensation. So this is something which we need to appreciate, that we measure not only what is easy to measure, but also what is difficult to measure. And this is an important challenge of control, isn't it? So I think we have reached the time limit. So we'll stop here and we will continue this discussion in the next class. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.